Smoke rose from the hollow like a devil's prayer, and somewhere inside it, a woman screamed. The land had always looked wrong here, even before the fire. The light bled out of the sky too fast, near dead Mare Hollow, as if it were being swallowed. The wind carried voices that weren't yours, and the soil, cracked and red like old blood, never let anything grow for long. That's why Mara June Bricks had chosen it. No one else would. She'd come west a widow, dragging 4 children and a mule cart loaded with grief. The preacher who buried her husband said a woman couldn't raise a family on dirt and ghosts. Mara had nodded, and then done it anyway. Built her fence with iron nails, hunted with a Hawken rifle older than her, and stitched schoolbooks into feed sacks to keep her kids learning letters. Every plank of the ranch she'd built bore fingerprints from her own hands. They called it Bricks Hollow, though the maps still marked it Dead Mare. The necklace around her neck, a smooth silver coil with a black stone in the center, never left her skin. It had belonged to her mother, and her mother before that. There was no story, just a rule. Never lose it. Her grandfather, a half-Comanche scout with more scars than teeth, had once called it a keeper's charm. That was all. That morning had started quiet, like death before a storm. Her oldest, Elijah, was fixing the chicken run. Ruthie, the youngest, had buried a rag doll in the corn patch and declared it a proper funeral. Mara was getting a hare for stew. When the smoke rolled over the ridgeline, she thought first of wildfires. She even went for the bucket. It wasn't until she saw the riders that she dropped it. 6 of them, maybe more. Dark shapes pushing through the smoke, their coats still bearing the remnants of the black wreath insignia. A mercenary outfit gone rogue since the war ended. They were the kind of men who rode for money until there was no money left, then rode for flesh. Elijah shouted before she could. "Mama!" The first shot hit the fence post near his head. Splinters flew. Chickens scattered. Mara grabbed her rifle and shouted for the children to run, but Ruthie just screamed and clutched her skirts. She fired once, dropped the first man clean through the eye. The second she winged in the shoulder. But there were too many. They spread out like a hunting pack, herding the children toward the barn. She stood her ground until one got close enough to crack her across the head with a rifle butt. She dropped, world tilting. Dust filled her mouth. Her hand searched blindly for the necklace even as her vision swam. It was still there. The last thing she saw before blacking out was Elijah, swinging a broken shovel at a rider's horse, screaming bloody. She came to bound and coughing, wrists raw against the coarse hemp rope. Her boots were gone. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. Her head pulsed like it was full of bees. The fire had eaten half the house. Smoke hung thick in the air, made orange by the setting sun. The barn was still standing. She could hear the low cry of her youngest somewhere inside. One of the men noticed her stirring. He was tall, with a beard that looked woven from wire and a coin-sized burn on his neck. His eyes were blue, but the wrong kind of blue, like frostbite. "Well, look at that," he said, squatting in front of her. "Pretty little homesteaders got some fight." She spat at him. Blood came with it. The man laughed and wiped his boot on her dress. "We're taking the kids up canyon to the trade spot. You, sweetheart, got a different fate. Heard there's a buyer down near Salt Tooth who likes them proud. Might knock that fire out of you for good. Touch my children, and I'll rip your spine out with my teeth." Mara croaked. He grabbed her by the chin. "Not a polite thing to say to your host." Then his eyes fell to her chest. "The necklace. Now what's this little prize?" "No," she snapped, struggling against the rope. But he'd already yanked it off. The silver snapped with a sickening sound, the black stone catching a glint of dying light. He held it up, sniffed it like it was perfume. "Old jewelry," he muttered. "You hussies always clutching superstition." He tossed it into the dirt and stood. The moment the necklace left her skin, the wind changed. It came in low, almost a growl. A sound like stone cracking underwater. Even the other raiders paused. "Storm coming?" one muttered, glancing at the sky. "No clouds," said another. "Sunset's wrong, though." The one with the beard shook it off. "You all are too jumpy. This land ain't cursed, just empty." But Mara could feel it. Something pulling. Something ancient. The hollow had been asleep. Now it had smelled blood. As night fell, they dragged her to the edge of the burned field, near what had once been her corn rows. A rough wooden cart waited, tied to 2 stolen oxen. They bound her to the wheel. Every time she turned her head, she caught glimpses of her children being led away. Elijah still dazed, Ruthie in tears. One of the younger raiders, no more than 20, looked uneasy. "You sure she's worth the trip? She'll bite a buyer's face off." The bearded man laughed. "Don't worry. She'll be docile by the time we get there. They all break." A moment passed. Then Mara said, low and steady, "You won't make it to Salt Tooth." The bearded man raised a brow. "No, you'll be dead before the moon rises." He crouched down again, grinning. "What? You got a husband hiding in the hills?" "No," she said, smiling through bloodied lips. "But the Hollow remembers what you did." A silence fell over the campfire. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a long, low howl echoed. It wasn't a wolf. Not quite. And as the fire cracked and the sky bled black, something unseen shifted in the dirt. The Hollow had been waiting, and it was hungry again. Night bled into the sky like oil on water, thick and too quiet. The deserters had set up camp beneath a tree split years ago by lightning, its blackened limbs clawing at the sky like a dead god's fingers. Around the cracked trunk, they built a fire from broken fence posts and ruined furniture scavenged from Mara's home. The flames danced off whiskey bottles and the steel glint of knives. Mara sat bound to the cart wheel, her wrists raw, her face dirt-streaked but defiant. Her head throbbed. Somewhere behind her, the echo of her baby's crying had finally gone still, either from exhaustion or a gag. The bearded man, the one they called Cutter, dealt cards to 3 others over a bedroll near the fire. A 4th man counted silver coins in his lap. A 5th sharpened a knife, the rhythm of stone on steel too slow, too deliberate. Elijah's too damn mouthy. One of them muttered between sips of rot gut. "The kid's got his mother's fire. Could be trouble." "You suggesting we quiet him?" another asked, glancing at Mara. "I'm suggesting he don't make it past the next ridge." Mara didn't move, didn't flinch, but her jaw clenched so hard it sent lightning down her neck. Her eldest. He'd stood between a gun and his sister with nothing but a shovel. They were going to silence him, bury him in a shallow grave under stars that wouldn't even remember his name. Cutter raised his hand for silence. "We'll do it quiet. No noise. No mess. Before sunup. Let the Hollow keep him." The men nodded. The fire crackled. Somewhere beyond it, a horse snorted. "Someone else hear that?" the knife sharpener asked, frowning. They all turned. The fire's light barely reached the rim of the trees. Then a shape emerged from the darkness, rider and horse in one shadow, dust still trailing like mist. The man didn't dismount, just sat there, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a long coat dusted with red earth. His horse was a piebald with black crow feathers braided into its mane. The man didn't speak, didn't move. Cutter rose, hand already drifting toward the pistol at his hip. "We ain't Taquine visitors," he called. No reply. "You deaf?" Still nothing. One of the younger deserters took a step forward, hand on his rifle. Then the stranger raised his head. Eyes like wet ash glinted beneath the brim. His face was half hidden behind a scarf, but what showed was all scars and silence. "Jesus," the car dealer muttered. "That ain't no regular rider." Cutter narrowed his eyes. "Name yourself." The rider pulled a scrap of parchment from his coat and dropped it to the dirt. Cutter walked over, picked it up. It was a bounty notice, stained, old, edges curled from heat. The name scrawled across it was Jonas Cutter. Cutter froze. "This a joke," he growled. "Nobody posted this." The rider finally moved. He dismounted in a single smooth motion, coat shifting to reveal a custom rifle slung across his back, double-barreled, breech-loaded, with silver inlays that shimmered even in shadow. The deserters all stepped back. Cutter barked a nervous laugh. "You trying to collect? This ain't no county. Ain't no law west of the Hollow." The man didn't argue, didn't blink. He reached into the dirt with a gloved finger and began to write. "She ain't." 2 words, drawn slow and sure. Cutter spat. "You writing poetry now?" That woman's our claim. She's payment for months of riding and risk. The man finally looked at Mara. Just a glance, but she felt it, cold and steady. Not pity. Recognition. Like he already knew her pain. One of the deserters laughed nervously. Hell, maybe he's a priest. Come to give her last rites. He's not a priest, whispered the youngest. I know who he is. They all turned. The boy backed up, eyes wide. I heard stories. About a man rides into cursed towns and leaves with no shadow. The kids say he can't speak, 'cause if he did, the land would split. Shut up, Cutter snapped. The rider unslung the rifle. Everything stopped. You pull that, Cutter said carefully. You best mean it. The rider didn't answer. He just moved, one fluid breath between motion and thunder. 3 shots. 3 bodies hit the ground. Blood sprayed the cards, the bottle, the sharpening stone. Cutter stumbled back, eyes wild, his pistol half drawn. The rider stepped forward, calm as dusk. Cutter shouted, She's ours. Then came the voice. Rough, deep, not loud but final. Untie her. Mara blinked. It was the first and only word he'd spoken, but it shook the trees. Cutter raised his gun. The stranger didn't flinch. Mara shouted, Don't. The final shot rang like judgment. Cutter dropped. The firelight flickered. Smoke rolled. The only sound was the hissing of spilled liquor, soaking hot coals. The rider turned and approached Mara. He pulled a knife, not quick, not threatening, and knelt beside her. In silence, he cut the ropes. She winced as circulation returned. Who are you? She asked. He didn't answer, but as he helped her up, she saw something beneath the edges of his coat. Skin marked with ink. Not tattoos. Not art. A map. Lines, rivers, symbols carved into flesh, faded with time. A path that only his body remembered. She staggered to her feet. He steadied her with one hand. She reached for the knife and took it. Thank you, she said, voice raw. He nodded once. She looked down at Cutter's body, still twitching. My children, she said. They're alive. Being held. North of here. The rider looked at her, as if weighing her soul. Then he turned toward his horse, mounted, and held out a hand. Mara took it. Behind them, the lightning tree creaked in the wind. The hollow was awake, and now it had 2 riders. They rode into Dead Mare Hollow just after dawn, but by the time they passed the first row of scorched cedar trees, it felt like evening. The sun hung wrong, low and red, even though it had risen only an hour ago. Shadows stretched too long across the path. Time bent sideways, like the trail itself couldn't decide which direction it belonged to. Mara rode a borrowed mule, hands tight on the reins. The rider, the one who had freed her, rode ahead without a word. He hadn't spoken again since Untie Her. Just gestures, nods, the occasional glance backward when the trail grew treacherous. She still didn't know his name, but the way the forest hushed around him said more than a name ever could. It wasn't just trees anymore. Shapes carved into bark appeared every mile, circles within circles, spirals broken with slashes. Old Apache wardings, meant to turn spirits away, but most of them were scarred or upside down. This land wasn't just abandoned, Mara muttered, scanning the woods. It was warned against. The rider didn't answer. He just stopped at a clearing where the trees bent inward, as though bowing toward something unseen. He dismounted, stepped toward a circle of stones buried beneath moss, and ran his fingers along a carved spiral in the largest one. Mara followed, cautious. You know what this means. He looked back at her. Then he reached into his coat and pulled a crumpled piece of parchment, not a map, but a page torn from some forgotten book. On it, inked in fading hand, was a legend. Asterisk the Hollow was once a bridle path for the painted elk people. The women rode blindfolded to the sacred spring, where vows were bound in smoke and salt. But one bride was betrayed, given to enemies in trade for horses. They dragged her down this canyon by her hair, wedding dress torn, her cries echoing off the rock until the very soil cracked from her rage. She died cursing every man who broke a woman here. Since then, the Hollow does not forgive. It eats the weak. It keeps the women. Asterisk. Mara read it twice. They sold her, she said, voice hollow, like they tried to sell me. The rider tucked the page away and mounted again. She followed. As they descended deeper, the trees thinned. The wind carried no birdsong, just the whine of insects and the occasional sound of brush moving where nothing should be. At midday, they passed a wagon tipped into a dry creek, half buried, crushed as if stamped by a giant's foot. A rusted bonnet still clung to the driver's seat. Mare dismounted and pushed aside the broken axle. Inside the back, she found them. 3 girls, eyes wide, dirt-streaked, rope still around their wrists. They flinched as Mare knelt beside them. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're not with the men who brought you here." They didn't speak, just looked at the rider behind her, then back to Mare. One of them finally nodded. Mare cut the bindings and handed them her canteen. 2 drank. The third stared out toward the trees. "How long have you been here?" Mare asked. The oldest girl answered. 3 nights. They were moving us toward the red church. That name sank cold into Mare's chest. Elijah had once drawn it in the dirt, a building he'd seen while hiding from the raiders. A chapel turned prison, beyond the cliffs. The rider nodded and began unpacking supplies. Mare helped the girls settle, wrapped one in her coat, and stared at the blood-soaked rear wall of the wagon. "Why just girls?" she asked aloud. The rider didn't answer, but the hollow did. That night, the wind changed. No breeze, no chill, just a stillness that crept up the spine. The girls slept huddled beneath a tarp. The rider cleaned his rifle, not with oil, but with something thick and dark that shimmered like ink. The silver inlays pulsed faintly, like veins. Mare sat near the fire, unable to sleep. "You don't talk much," she said, glancing at him. He didn't look up. "I've heard men say less and mean more," she continued. "But you don't sleep. You don't eat much. You flinch when I touch your shoulder. And there's something carved under your sleeve." He paused. "You one of them?" she asked softly. "One of the hollows taken?" He looked up. Eyes not afraid, not angry, just tired. Before he could answer, a sound rose through the night. Hooves. Dozens. But no vibration. No movement. Just sound. They emerged from the east ridge like phantoms. Women in bridal veils lit with flame. Horses made of bone and smoke. The air turned sulfur-sweet. The children stirred. Mare grabbed the girls and stepped in front of them. The rider rose slow. "Come." He unslung the rifle. The ghost brides encircled the camp. One of them, veiled, skin cracked like old porcelain, pointed at Mare. Then they screamed. All of them. It was not a sound meant for ears. It bent the trees. The fire extinguished in a hiss. The rider didn't flinch. He aimed, pulled the trigger. The rifle didn't bark. It sang, a high chime of metal and something deeper. From the barrel came not just fire, but light, pure, blinding. It struck the lead spirit in the chest. She exploded into white ash. The rest reeled. But they didn't retreat. The rider stepped forward, chanting low. Not in English. Not in Apache. Something older. The rifle glowed again. His coat whipped in the sudden wind. The fire roared back to life. The ghost riders vanished in a gust, sucked into the hollow like breath held too long. Silence fell. Mare stared at him. "That's no ordinary weapon." He turned to her. In his eyes, not pride, not power, regret. She stepped closer, reached out. He flinched. She stopped. "You're not just a man," she said. "What are you?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said, "Asterisk I was once. Not anymore, asterisk." The children stirred behind them. The moment passed. At first light, they climbed higher into the canyon. Late that afternoon, Mare saw it. Through a narrow pass where trees grew sideways from the stone. A chapel, built of blood-colored brick. Its steeple crooked. Iron cages stacked outside like coffins waiting for their occupants. The red church, the last stronghold of the black wreath. She dismounted and looked to the rider. He nodded once. The hollow watched. And it would soon learn the difference between prey and reckoning. The chapel sat like a wound carved into the red cliffside, its crooked bell tower rising above rusted iron cages and prayer stones long since overturned. Mara crouched behind a cluster of boulders, with Enoch beside her, both cloaked in the sour smoke of burned cedar. The children they'd rescued were hidden in a dry ravine below, watched over by the oldest girl. Elijah and her 3 younger ones were inside that church, somewhere behind its broken windows and chain-wrapped doors. The plan was simple. Desperate plans usually were. "I go in," Mara whispered. "Play helpless. I'll get them looking the wrong way." Enoch shook his head slowly. "They won't expect me," she said. "I was theirs once. They think I'm just another brand on the ledger." He stared at her, then up at the broken bell tower. "You take the high ground," she said. "When the time comes, give him judgment." Enoch finally nodded. He touched his fingers to the strange rifle, then to the dirt, then to her shoulder. The warmth of his touch lingered. Then he was gone, a shadow slipping through trees, toward the chapel's flank. Mara walked straight down the road. The guard saw her coming, rifles half raised, their expressions folding into disbelief. "I escaped," she said, voice ragged. "The ghost man left me. The others didn't make it." They dragged her inside, into the dark lungs of the chapel. The nave had been stripped of holiness. Stained glass windows shattered, wooden pews black with rot. A half-burned crucifix leaned against the wall beside a stack of chains and collars. The altar had been turned into a counting table, bullets, silver, liquor, and teeth stacked in separate piles. And at the head, in a stolen priest's robe, sat the commander, Sergeant Mare, bald, pale, with a long scar from jaw to collarbone that never quite healed. His eyes were sharp and blue and full of rot. "Well, well," he said. "The Hellcat returns. Thought you'd gone ghost." Mara said nothing. "Didn't think you had it in you," he said, rising slowly. "Burning half my men, escaping into the hollow. But here you are, dirty and broken again." "You still have my children," she said. "Course we do. They're currency." She looked around. At the columns, the second-level balconies, the shattered windows. She counted 6 men, plus Mare. She smiled. "Funny thing," she said, her voice sharpening. "You dragged me here once. By the hair. Burned my home. Took everything I had." Mare tilted his head. "And you didn't take enough." He narrowed his eyes. Then, from the bell tower, came thunder. A bullet cracked through stained glass, shattering a man's skull before he could scream. The next one dropped with a hole in his chest, spinning backward into the pews. Panic erupted. Mara dove behind the altar. Mare cursed and drew his revolver, barking orders. Men scattered. Another bullet struck a lantern, which exploded against a pillar. Mara stood and grabbed a torch from the wall. The pews were soaked in oil, old blood, and dust. They caught fire fast. Smoke rose like incense. Men screamed. One charged her with a blade. She ducked, drove her knee into his ribs, and smashed his face into the altar. His teeth scattered across Maren's bullet pile. Enoch fired again from above. Another man crumpled. A scream rose from the back. "Elijah!" Mara shouted, racing toward it. She found her children locked in a side room, guarded by a single raider with a shaking pistol. Before he could speak, she swung a length of broken wood into his throat. He dropped like a sack. Her children swarmed her, arms, tears, gasps. "Out the side," she commanded. "Through the gully. Run." They fled. Behind her, Mare roared in fury. He moved through the burning chapel, cloak catching flame at the hem. Enoch fired, missed. Mare ducked behind a column and fired up into the tower. A scream answered. Enoch dropped from the bell tower, landed hard, rifle tumbling from his hands. Mara ran to him, helped him up. Blood soaked his side. "Can you stand?" He nodded once. "Barely." Then Mare stepped from the smoke. "I like you better chained," he growled, aiming his pistol. Mara stepped in front of Enoch. Mare smirked. "How noble." Then the ground shook. A sound, low and terrible, began to rise from beneath them, a groaning like roots tearing through stone. The fire twisted. The air turned sulphurous. Mare froze. "What?" "The hollow's waking," Mara said. "You took the necklace." He stared. "The necklace? That trinket?" "It wasn't a trinket," she said. "It was a seal." Maren's mouth opened. His skin paled. "Your men tore it off," Mare said. "The curse was held at bay until you broke the chain." He fired. The bullet struck her shoulder. She staggered but didn't fall. Another sound rose, not from the chapel, but from the earth itself. Screaming. Hundreds of voices. All women. Enoch crawled toward the rifle, picked it up. Mare turned, panicked. "What is this?" "You killed her," Enoch said, voice rasping through blood. "And the hollow remembers." Mare aimed at Enoch. Mare, with her good arm, hurled a burning chain at him. It struck his coat. Flame took root. He screamed. Enoch raised the rifle, its silver veins glowing bright. One shot. Maren's body dropped into the fire. Silence followed. Then the church trembled. A crack split the floor. Beneath it, darkness pulsed like a heartbeat. Mare turned to Enoch. "The curse, it's not just a story, is it?" He shook his head. "What are you?" she asked. He looked at her, breathing ragged. "I was a preacher once. Long ago. Came west to save the lost. Built a church in this very hollow. But it wasn't salvation I found." He looked around. "The curse infected my flock. Madness, possession, they turned on each other. I put them down, one by one. Then, I wandered, looking for women like you, marked by what the hollow wants." "Why?" "Because you're the last," he said. "The last bride. And if you stay, you can finish what the first bride started." Mare pulled the broken necklace from her pocket. Its stone still gleamed. She wrapped it around her wrist. The trembling stopped. The flames dimmed. The crack sealed. Enoch looked at her. "If you put that on, you won't come out again." Mare nodded. "But they will." She looked toward the gully, toward her children. "I'll see them safe," Enoch said. She smiled. "You better." He limped to the door. Mare turned, walked toward the altar, and as Enoch led the children into the rising dawn, the chapel behind them pulsed with light. The hollow had its reckoning, and its bride. Enoch rode out of the hollow, with 4 children huddled in the cart behind him, wrapped in wool and silence. The mule pulled slow through the dust, its hooves barely stirring the dry ground. Behind them, the canyon walls groaned like something exhaling its final breath. Mist coiled up from the ravine, thick and silver, curling around the blood-streaked stones, and burned church like a curtain drawing closed. The trail behind them vanished. Trees leaned in to cover it. Vines crept down like fingers stitching a wound. And when Enoch turned to look back one last time, the hollow was gone, swallowed whole by smoke and memory. He said nothing, just rode on. They reached a town 3 days later. The youngest girl still wouldn't speak. Ruthie clung to Enoch's coat every time he dismounted. Elijah, bruised but unbroken, helped the others out of the cart and stood like a man grown when the sheriff asked, "Who's in charge here?" Enoch gave them the last of his water, the last of his food. Then, before anyone could stop him, he rode back into the dusk. No one ever saw him again, but the stories began. They say a woman's scream still echoes through dead Mare Hollow, not a cry of pain, but a fury sharpened to steel. They say the wind carries the sound of burning chains, and that the mist, when it rolls over the hills, tastes like firewood and blood. They say the land is quiet now, not safe, never safe, but settled. The curse held in place by something stronger than hate, something righteous, something watching. And then came the Saloon Stories. 10 years on, in a mining town far west of the hollow, a scar-faced bartender told a tale to a half-drunk bounty hunter. He said a man had come through once, middle of the night, bleeding from the ribs, carried a rifle with silver veins, the likes of which no smith had ever made, asked for no room, no drink, just a hammer and a nail. He hung the rifle above the saloon's crossbeam with a copper plate beneath it, didn't say a word, just nodded once and vanished. The plaque read, asterisk he rode with her. That was enough, asterisk. Others came later, whispering their own tales. They said in the camps where traffickers worked their evil, whole wagons of girls vanished without a trace. Chains left rusting, guards found torn apart, skin scorched like lightning struck. No footprints, no signs, except one, a scorched bridal veil. And sometimes, on the walls of those camps, etched by nails or knives or blood, were 4 words. Untie her. She rides. Some say she's a ghost. Others say she never died, that she walks still, silver necklace bright against charred skin, dragging fire in her wake. No one sees her face. Only the black dress trailing cinders behind her. Only the children she leads by the hand, out of shadow and into dawn. No grave bears her name. But if you ride too close to dead Mare Hollow, or raise your hand against the wrong woman on a cursed night, the wind may shift, and you might hear it. That scream. The one they couldn't silence. They tried to sell her, break her, burn her. But they only made her eternal.